Hello, and welcome to Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast. This is a show about how artists use technology for storytelling, and I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. If you haven't seen the animated film Soul on Disney Plus yet, you're really missing out. This is a great new film from Pixar Animation Studios. As with all the Pixar movies, it's hugely ambitious. It's beautiful, works on a grand scale, and it's really wrestling with some pretty big existential issues like what happens after we die, and where do souls come from, and personalities, and what's the purpose of life. And of course, it's Pixar, so it's hilariously funny at the same time, but make sure to keep that box of tissues pretty handy, trust me. Today, I'm sitting down with the director of Soul and the chief creative officer of Pixar Animation Studios, Pete Docter. He gives us some amazing insights into the creative process that goes into making Pixar films and the challenges of bringing modern day New York City and the great beyond and the great before to life. Also joining us is the movie's producer, Dana Murray, who has been with Pixar since way back in 2001. It's a fascinating conversation, and this is a webinar that I did recently with our friends at Film at Lincoln Center and the New York Film Festival Artist Academy. So you can have the rare treat of sitting in on that conversation and hearing what Pete and Dana have to say to those artists at the Artist Academy. So thanks once again for tuning in. Let's jump in. So I'm thrilled to be here and having this conversation with the director of Soul, Pete Docter, and the producer of the film, Dana Murray. I have so many questions for the two of you on this film, and I got to say, first of all, I just want to fanboy out a little before we start. This movie, I don't know how you keep doing it at Pixar, just raising the bar on fantastic filmmaking. But we at the Artist Academy, we have a lot of writer directors, a lot of filmmakers, and so I wanted to start our conversation really talking about the development process on the film. I think when you have a movie that's as beautiful and thoughtful as Soul is, you kind of have this notion that it emerges from the ether fully formed in its current state. But I understand that there was a pretty lengthy development process on Soul. And so, Pete, I wanted to ask you, what was the movie that you started to make, and how did it eventually become what we've seen?
Yeah, you do have that idea that, Walt Disney's just sitting in bed and he goes, Dumbo, and then it's all there, and it's not the way it works. It's absolutely the opposite of that. It's like you start with one idea and then you add something and take something else away. And it's more like sculpting with clay or something, I guess. The first movie, the story of this was, well, it actually kind of started watching my kids. My son was going off to college. And I was, as a parent, like, thinking back when he was little and then recognizing, wait a minute, I remember when he was born, he basically had a personality, right? And like trying to think, like, how is that possible? Where did that come from? There must be somewhere that's not on Earth that gives you the sense of who you are. And so started playing around with this idea of, what eventually mutated into The Great Before. And our first story was just two souls that lived up there. The whole film took place there. They looked down on Earth and said, we don't want to go. This looks like a waste of time. The long and short of it was that through their friendship, they eventually decided to go. They figured that the only thing that would make life worth it is friendship. And they go to Earth and they become Lewis and Clark, the real life, team that I gather were good friends. And, it had some cute ideas to it. But I think the thing that really attracted everybody was this idea of like trying to figure out where we come from. And we got to explore that for the next 4 years as the story grew and shifted and changed. And we have a whole process, which we can get into if you want, that basically forces us to show our work every 3 months to each other, which is a lot of times uncomfortable, but you get a lot of great notes from people. And I think it's an essential part of what we do anyway, of shaping the film.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that process and sort of like, how do you develop the I think for a lot of creatives, it's hard to show your work, especially at such a early nascent stage, because it's so, you kind of have to build up a thick skin.
Yeah, Dana, you want to talk at all about the process?
Yeah, sure. I think the difference that Pixar does is like we never have our script, like our full script, like ready to go until literally like months after the film is done. And we ask someone to like, it's just
we're not proud of that, but it's what happens.
It is what it is. Yeah. And so, our writing process really is like building these story reels. So we're starting with the script goes to the story artist. The story artist is drawing the scene that goes to editorial. They're cutting it together with dialogue, which we call scratch, like our temp, actors around the studio, actors. And cutting music. And then every 3 months we do this and we get it in front of, as many people as we could fit in our theater, which is like 240 people or something. And we get a lot of notes and we tear it all down and we start the whole entire process over. And on this film, we did that. We had time to do that 7 times. Or on Inside Out, I think we got to do 10 or 11. So wow. It felt very quick for animation. It was fast.
The weird thing is, I feel like for me anyway, that's where we find the films, right? In editorial. And we are kind of essentially editing it before we shoot it. We're having these stand-in images that will represent, we need a shot that's 4 feet, 7 frames, that's a close-up of Joe or whatever it is. So it's
and do you do that before do you do that before you do the voice recording sessions with the actors? So you had you have a stable of folks at Pixar that you do scratch recordings with? Is that how you kind of flesh that process?
Yeah, we call them the Pixar Players. A group of anybody we can drag into there who's got any acting chops at all, and it's usually pretty clunky.
Yeah, for this film, we hired a local actor to do our scratch. So sometimes for your key main characters, you may bring in like more like someone with a little bit more experience. So that was helpful.
So my understanding from reading is that the plot line really kind of originally focused on the character of 22. And I'm curious sort of at what point did Joe Gardner come into the picture? And how did you kind of alight on jazz as a great way to explore some of these kind of themes?
I was just looking through some of the earlier drafts. I think the first version, Joe had amnesia. And he knew he was not a new soul, but he could not place where he was from. You remember that, Dana? And so the whole film was like an unraveling of this. Oh, wait, I had a flash of something. And we tried the idea that he was an actor, because that seemed kind of fun and intriguing. But we kept getting notes back from people saying, oh, he just wants to be famous. That's not appealing. So we were looking for some kind of like pure thing, and we figured, well, jazz, I've always loved jazz. And you don't go into jazz to get rich and famous. You do it because you love it. And so that seemed intriguing. And then as we got into it, man, the thematic elements of jazz are so, like the idea of you're improvising, you're given a tune, but what you do with it is so personal. And it can, obviously as a musician, you're trying to make it something beautiful and unique and never before seen, which is just like life. And so the more we learned about jazz, the more it made all these other decisions for us in terms of really connecting thematically with the film. Even things like Joe, jazz is Black improvisational music. Joe, our main character, should be Black, should be African American. A lot of those choices grew out of that simple idea of using jazz in the movie.
Right. I'm keeping an eye on our chat box, and there's a question that just popped up that I think is interesting. The question is, were there 1 or 2 notes during the process that really struck you as vital to cracking the story?
This isn't so much a note, but I thought a pivotal moment was we watched the Herbie Hancock masterclass. Mm-hmm. And Pete came in and like showed me this story that he tells about playing with Miles Davis. And it basically was the theme of our film. You should tell it, Pete. You tell it.
Yeah, he says, he says, we were having a great tour. I think they were in Europe, and he said this one concert was just amazing. They were totally killing it. And then Herbie says, then I played this chord, which was so wrong. I worry that I'd ruined that whole night and reduced it to rubble. And he says, but then I look over and Miles Davis takes a breath and he plays some notes and he made my chord right. Mm. And he's like, I could not figure out how he did that. Here's what happened. He didn't judge what he had played. He just took it as something new that happened and tried to do what any jazz musician should try to do, which is take anything that happens and turn it into something of value. Mm-hmm. And that just seemed so impactful as a story, as a metaphor for life. And it just, that kind of locked in that decision.
And as instruction for filmmaking too, right?
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah. And the coolest part is I was like, well, let's just call Herbie and see if he'll come talk to us. And he said yes. So then we got to work with Herbie Hancock, and he was one of our amazing consultants on the film.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
It's amazing. And so when you created the character of Joe and started to explore this world of jazz, is that when you brought Kemp Powers into the, and he came in originally as a screenplay writer, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As soon as we decided that Joe was going to be an African-American, we knew we needed help. And so we immediately were looking for an African-American writer. So in development, we have great people who read so many scripts and brought us, ideas. But we actually read Kemp's play One Night in Miami, which is now the great film that's out now.
Kemp has had a pretty amazing year, hasn't he?
Yeah. We were calling it Kempmas because both his films were coming out on Christmas.
They both opened on Christmas Day, didn't they? Isn't that it's really crazy?
Yeah, he's been busy. Mm-hmm. But yeah, we read that play and we were in this period of really wanting to develop our characters, and the character development he has in that script was just amazing. So he flew up. I wish he was here because he tells a pretty funny story about that day. But anyway, as soon as we met him, he related so much to Joe's story. He grew up in New York, same age, the artist journey. He just had a lot of, he felt like that writing this film was meant for him. So it was a great fit.
Yeah, he said, screenwriting is like his third career, and he was trying at an age where, most people are like, really, you should move on now. It's not working out, get real. And Kemp kept going, and it's very much like Joe, where he's like, okay, I got a couple more years before I can, before the door slams shut.
Yeah. Yeah.
He said the first scene we had him write, which I didn't remember this, but was the scene with his mom, Liva, in the tailor shop. And he's like, I pulled from many conversations like that I've had with my mom. So,
Well, you certainly didn't have him start with the easy thing, right?
Yeah.
Just throw him into the deep end of the pool and see what happens.
Well, because, we were still trying to figure out why is that scene there? What is it that mom is pulling out of him? Because thematically, of course, we knew from an early standpoint that we were going to talk about, using a fancy word, essentialism, the idea that, hey, we're each put on earth with an essence of who we are and some sort of purpose. And Joe believes that. And then we got to argue the opposite with 22, who's kind of a nihilist, who's like, there's no point to anything. It's all absurd. And in the course of the film, he becomes, like an existentialist, which is, yes, there's meaning, but you have to bring it yourself. You have to come out into the world with some point of view. And so it was a fun chance to talk about a lot of stuff that, we learned about in high school philosophy class, but hopefully done in a fun way through character.
I would say that you accomplished that. It did not come off as a dry.
Okay, good.
Yes, absolutely. Dana, a question that I have for you is, I feel like with each new film, Pixar kind of breaks some new technical ground. And one of the things that I love to talk about on our programs is how artists are using technology to tell story. So what were the big challenges on Soul in terms of new technology that you had to develop or utilize in order to tell this particular story?
Definitely cracking the look for the soul world was incredibly difficult. It really, we made art and technical one department, just because really we couldn't find that look in a painting. They really needed each other to discover. So I'd say the tools that were new were for our soul characters specifically. They're very ethereal and non-physical, and all these words of like, okay, we need them to like show up on screen, so we need them to look like something, but we use these line work, which we hadn't done, so that you can kind of read the forms as they're moving, hands especially. But
line work like you would associate with 2D, like cell drawing kind of animation.
Well, kind of. I mean, like on the model, because they would be kind of formless without it. But yeah, it was you mostly noticed it on the hands specifically. But the most difficult character, which we found out was the second most difficult Pixar character ever, was actually the Terry and Jerry's, which we thought, Pete and I, when we saw it, when we were developing it in art, we were like, oh my gosh, this is like a line. Like the animators are going to love this. They'll fly through these shots. And it ended up being so hard, which, now makes sense once they explain it to you. You're like, oh, but they also had a lot of fun doing it.
Well, I would love to hear more about that, because to your point, looking at it, it seems like these are kind of, almost like wire figures that should be pretty easy to animate. What was the challenge with those? With those?
This is from our art book. We have characters that were drawn, very simple flat things, and then one of the designers, Deanna, sculpted them in 3D. But they're kind of like they're wire, so they're dimensional, but they're flat. So it was a cool, like, mess with your mind kind of an idea that seemed like it would be going to be fun. And we thought easy at the time. Little did we know.
I'd love to for you to talk a little bit more about the production design on the film, and specifically, you set such a contrast between New York City and the after and before life. What was your inspiration in terms of the visual design for the great before and the great beyond?
Jazz was a huge influence on the city. You look at the great album covers of jazz records from the 60s and the 70s. There's got these angles and rhythm to them and color, and they're super poppy. And then we wanted the opposite of that, because when you think of souls, as Dana mentioned, it's ethereal, non-physical, invisible. And so we were looking for ways to capture that. I guess because of the philosophy stuff I mentioned, we first looked at ancient Greece, and we were imagining people standing around in robes, philosophizing and learning the sort of ideas that would help them through life. But then we felt, well, we don't want to accidentally say everybody's Greek. It's supposed to be that the world is populated from the souls from this place. So we wanted it to be non-specific culturally, and so that caused us to really simplify the forms down to almost like mathematical, much more pure kind of shapes. We also, I was remembering this weekend, the first attempts at the Great Before were much more abstract. It was just like color and blobs and things like this, and then the characters in there. And we found it was so disorienting to look at, to just imagine, okay, this whole movie's going to take place and I don't know where anything is. It was not the feeling we needed for the storytelling. We needed the characters to feel like this is comforting and welcoming. And so we really needed to adjust our sense of design to work for the story, even to the point of almost hinting at nature. There's these grass kind of things that Joe falls into, and hills, rolling hills that are arranged in a mathematically kind of pure way, but still evoking nature for that sense of comfort.
I'd like to pivot for a second and talk about sound and music. Obviously, very, very dear to my heart. You worked with the sound designer Ren Kleiss on the film, who is just just an extraordinarily talented sound designer. And then, of course, the music. You kind of echo that same split between the real world in New York and the before and after life in the music. So you got the sort of a traditional score from, not traditional, but a score from Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross, which is basically, now I want to make sure I get this right. Were there rules? Was that sort of the music of the before and afterlife? And then in New York, the jazz music was from John Batiste, right? So was that a rule that you made? Like it's one kind of music in this space and another kind of music in another space? And how did you balance all that out?
Yeah, our editor, Kevin Nolting, just started cutting it to temp, with that sort of in mind. And we said, oh, let's see how far we can take this. Could we do all of the Earth world with jazz? And it turned out to work pretty well. Very different than anything we'd done before. It was originally jazz standards that we were assuming whoever we worked with would do their rendition of that. But then as we met John and he showed him the film, he felt that they needed to be more specific to what was going on. So he wrote original jazz tunes. And then Trent and Atticus, I think actually, it's funny, I was thinking, Ren was probably the first choice we made in terms of outside collaborators and what an effect that had, because he had worked with Trent and Atticus.
We ended up David Fincher films, right?
Yeah, we had ended up reaching out through Ren to see if they would be interested, and so it was. Ren's an incredible guy. He thinks way beyond just like sound effects. When you think of sound effects, you're like bonk, tsh, honk, those kind of sounds. He's really thinking much more emotionally and storytelling and how this works on a bigger level. And he also, his work is so partnered with what Trent and Atticus bring. So instead of just music playing off of speakers, left and right, you're in the middle of this. The music is part of the world itself. And those were all kind of new elements that we'd never really dealt with before on a Pixar film. And I think really give that whole world a completely different feel.
Dana, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I just was thinking like, we had Ren in there in editorials so early on, and as we were discovering the look of the Soul World, and I think he played a critical piece in that, with what Pete was talking about, the nature and all of that is just all of it is so part of like being in that world, and the music too.
Yeah, even the sort of nature stuff, that was actually Ren's idea sonically. And so then as he brought that, we were like, wait, maybe he's onto something here. And so we echoed it visually.
You just touched on something that I find it really interesting when you get into a space of where you're working, you're kind of blurring the line between sound design and music. And it's, there's tonal elements to the sound design and it's a really rich kind of creative, fertile space. I know, we've got a lot of filmmakers in our crowd today with the Artist Academy, and one of the questions that I'm really curious to get your take on is, I think for a lot of filmmakers, it's really difficult for them to talk with their sound and their music departments because it's sound and music are often very difficult to kind of discuss. So for you, Pete, how do you approach working with someone like Ren or with Atticus and Trent in terms of like, how do you talk to them about what you want to accomplish with a given scene or with the overall design of the sound and music of the film?
Well, I learned the hard way by trying to get too much into their business. And so I thought I was being helpful early on working with a composer and trying to articulate things like, what if we, tacit the tuba and double the strings so that we get more? And that the composer got very upset because he was thinking, oh, okay, Pete doesn't trust me. Pete doesn't like my ideas. He's trying to do this himself. So I have slowly learned over the course of my career, like I feel the best way to communicate with people is in terms of emotion. What is it that we're trying to convey? What do we want the audience to feel? When they sit and watch the scene, regardless of what's actually happening, it's a crowd scene or it's a chase, whatever. What's the emotional quality that we're trying to evoke? And if I can communicate that through metaphor, through description, through any number of other things, then it unlocks the composer or the sound designer to bring their own ideas. So in the case of The Great Before, we were using words like we wanted to be comforting and welcoming and enveloping, and and we talked a lot about, we showed him some of the design work that we had done. So anything to kind of help set the mood and then let them go. Because man, and through the whole film, anytime people comment on our movies, it's like 1% me, 99% all the other great people and ideas that have come out of communicating that way.
Well, Dana, you mentioned something that I wanted to follow up on, which is this idea of, excuse me, bringing in the sound designer early for consultation and conversation. I think, often, especially with live action films, sound design is kind of, left to the end of the process after the movie's shot and largely edited. And then you bring the sound people in to sort of like just slather some sound effects in. What is gained for you creatively by having a sound artist come in earlier in the process and start to spitball and share ideas?
I mean, definitely the world building, like we were talking about with the Soul World. But I think having Ren involved early on was key because of our partnership with Trent and Atticus and just his working relationship with them and just how they've worked in the past. And because we had never worked this way, like always, getting the score at the very end. This was a very different process for us as well. So having Ren in there, he was kind of like our mediator, talking to them and talking to us. And so he was incredibly helpful from the beginning.
Yeah. You mentioned directing the actors, and so I am curious to hear about what was your casting process, especially for some of the supporting characters. I was so thrilled to hear. I recognized Rachel House's voice right away. We had given a Dolby Institute fellowship to Taika Waititi for Hunt for the Wilder People, and she was one of my favorite characters in that film.
That's how we found her.
That's right.
That movie.
Yeah, typically what we do, and in some cases, for your leads, generally we'll have some ideas. But a lot of times we have a couple folks who are casting at Pixar. We ask them to just give us little snips of dialogue with no picture and no names. So Joe, number 7, we'll just listen to it. And by this time I think in all cases, we've had the designs done. So we have a picture of the design of the character we're trying to cast, and we just listen to voices, and some people really fit, and then some people are better at guessing who they are than others. I'm pretty lousy at it. I just want to kind of see, does that fit this? And I am not even really trying to think of who it is, but, getting to work with Alicia Baraga, Richard Iowata, Felicia Rashad. We just had this amazing, I think probably the most international cast of any Pixar film.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that kind of meant we didn't get to meet some of them, a lot of them, like Rachel House. We've only ever met her on Zoom, which kind of sucks.
Yeah.
But
we're going to New Zealand when this is all over.
That's right.
I think a lot of us wish we were in New Zealand right now.
I know.
Well, since you brought up working remotely, I am curious. I understand you did have to finish this film during COVID, during quarantine. So how did you go about doing that? It seems, I've been to the Pixar campus before, and it's such a hive of activity and everyone all in the same place and kind of ideas bouncing across. And obviously you have a tremendous technical infrastructure there as well. So how did you go about finishing this movie in quarantine?
Like this. It was mid-March when we shut the doors at Pixar, leading up to 2 weeks. I mean, we all were seeing kind of what was happening in the news. So we started making plans with our systems department, and they were pretty incredible. So they just, they had everyone just be ready to take their machines home. And within a couple days, everyone was up and running. There was Wi-Fi issues and people waiting to get, upgrades and that kind of thing. But it was incredible. So we had 7.5 weeks of production left. And we ended up finishing on time, which there's no way I thought that would have happened. When we were leaving, I was kind of like, well, and we were also naive. We were like, see you in a few weeks, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Which seems so idiotic now, but looking back. But it was really incredible. And then once we finished, there was a small group of us that went into the studio to final the shots just in the theater, which, we call digital dailies. So to just do those finals. And then we sat on the film for like a month, and then we went up to Skywalker and did post. We were all in separate rooms and masked and, arrows one way down the hallway, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
But you were able to go out to the ranch and actually be there for the mixing sessions and to hear things.
We were there way
normally.
less. Yeah. But we kind of just went out for reviews rather than like hanging out and enjoying the ranch like we like to.
And then a lot of the decisions we'd made for artistic reasons ended up really helping us. You know, Trent and Atticus were able to finish score because it's the two of them, not a whole orchestra. You know, we did, and we were lucky to hire John Batiste, who's like a multi-musician. So he did the end credits song by himself at his house, just multi-tracking, you know. I think he ended up bringing in somebody else to do drums, but, you know, it helps to work with talented people.
It sure does. I'm curious about the ending of the film and how you decided to end it where you did. It's really a beautiful ending that resolves but leaves a lot of questions open. And I'm curious, you know, was that clear to you from the beginning, or did that go through a lot of iterations as well? How do you decide where to end your movies, basically?
One of my favorite moments was watching the audience preview. And you remember there's a moment in the middle of the movie where Joe says, "No, I was born to be a musician. I know." And he jumps down. And the person sitting next to me, who was just a recruited audience member, said, "Teacher." And I was like, oh, this is great, because we've set up this idea that either Joe has to be a teacher or a musician. But of course, the point is neither, both, all, you know. It's actually, again, goes back to Herbie Hancock and a number of other musicians who said, look, I'm a musician, but I'm also a father and a husband and a brother, and I'm all these things. And so the idea of ending the movie not showing an answer to those seemed important. You know, we tried some actually where we showed him going back to teach and play at the same time, and it just wasn't fulfilling in the way I thought it would be. You know, I think we were referencing "It's a Wonderful Life," you know, where he runs out, "Merry Christmas, Bedford Falls," and that's so fun. His energy is so joyous and infectious. But for whatever reason, it didn't play for us, and we thought better to just end on this sort of idea of embracing the day, of breathing deeply, sun shining on his face, and it's it's up to the audience where things go from there.
Well, and you set that up earlier with that wonderful story that Dorothea Williams tells to him after they play the show, right? The fish story. The fish story. Because I think you've created a character in Joe who feels like if he's not going to be a musician, then he's failed. And that's the great journey for him on this film, is letting go of that, right?
Yeah, and I think it's a journey for a lot of us. I know for me, there's so many days when I define myself too singly as like a Pixar guy or a filmmaker or whatever, you know, and you stop embracing the world and just paying attention to things that you walk right past all the time, you know. And I guess that's one benefit of being quarantined, is like everybody's world shrunk, you know. And so now we're starting to pay attention to things, sometimes not in an appreciative way, but to things that we might have breezed past on any other day. So I feel like it was stuff that was bumping around in my head prior to COVID and everything, but it's often when you're robbed of something and you don't have it anymore that suddenly you realize, wait, that's important, you know.
Right.
Going out with friends to dinner, oh my gosh, that's important, you know. So it was it was a real gift working on this film, because whatever you do, you're going to be obsessing over it for the time in which you're working on it. This film got to talk about some pretty big ideas that I think I'm slowly starting to become more intentional about certain things because of having worked on the movie.
Really? Can you give me an example?
Well, I mean, most of it's going to sound like dopey self-help type stuff, but just stopping and in the morning and sitting for 10 minutes and not going right to work, but just stopping and hearing and smelling. And I don't know if that's what that's going to do, but it's fun for that 10 minutes. And usually I have to stop my brain from going, oh, wait, I have to email. Oh, no, stop. Just be for a second and see where that goes.
Right. Well, it's. I'm sure it's partially the film, and for many of us, COVID has kind of forced us to slow down a little bit and to kind of take things in. So before we open up to questions, I do come from the Dolby Institute, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about Dolby Vision and Dolby Atmos and how those technologies opened up some possibilities for you in storytelling on this particular film.
I was so skeptical of Dolby Vision because every couple of years something comes along and you're like, well, that was a lot of work for nothing. And when we saw Inside Out, I was blown away. That was a huge. I wish everybody could see our movies that way. And I'm not just saying that because you're on. It's like colors that I didn't know existed. It brings this vibrancy and contrast, and the darks are so dark you can't see whether the projector's on or not. It was like, yeah. So I think as we were making this film, sequences like where Joe is going towards the great beyond, that glowing white light, we were through the whole time going, ooh, I can't wait to see this on Dolby Vision, because it's the darks just go away. The edge of the frame just disappears and you're in this space. And it's a pretty fabulous technology.
Well, I can't wait to see it in one of our cinemas in Dolby Vision. But I think, even the way you use light, the autumn light in New York City, it's so beautiful and soft. And I can't wait to see that in Vision. And I'm thinking about, I think the first time that Joe sees Dorothea play in the club, and I think she's like 3/4 turned, and there's just the way the light goes down the saxophone, the reflect just is so stunning. It's you really blur the line between live action and animation in some of these frames in a really delightful way.
Well, we have these amazing tools and incredible artists like Ian McGibbon and the whole lighting crew. They're able to take these natural elements and apply them in sometimes natural, but other times very stylized ways, which is, look, any choice you make in a film is going to have an effect on the audience. And so if you can harness that and use it in a way to further your aims, in the case of the saxophone and like that, we were well aware that this place in real life, these jazz clubs are basements. They're kind of dumpy. They're like, you bump your head as you go down there. Why would you aspire to work at a place like that? So we tried to use everything we could to romanticize it and to bring it to make you lean forward with Joe and go like, wow, this is not only this place, but this person, this musician is just incredibly good. And so, again, that comes from kind of speaking emotionally, I think, to them about like what it was we were after, and then Ian and his whole team came up with a lot of those specific ideas.
That's great. And then the sound design just really reinforced the sense of wonder too. I'm thinking about the Hall of View. Just the sound design in that particular sequence is just beautiful.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. Dana, do you have thoughts on that?
Oh no, I love that scene. I was just thinking the David Diggs rap, the Cedric's rap group. I don't know if most people know that, but he wrote and performed that little bit that ends up being in the end credits too.
But it's another example of how sound really drives the eye. You can have a wide shot. If in real life, if you're doing a shot like that, you'd have a cacophonous bunch of noise. But by just bringing certain elements up or down, you can actually control where the audience is looking through the sound. And that always kind of shocks me, because it seems counterintuitive, but because it's not like the speaker's moving, right? It's just the sound, and our brain says, look over there, because that's where the sound's coming from. It's pretty interesting.
Great. Well, let's open up and take some questions, shall we? So would you say that a religious or philosophical tradition in particular inspired you in thinking about the great before and the afterlife?
The curious thing is, I've spoken with a friend who's Jewish, a pastor, and a couple people from Asia, and they all claim that the center belief structure is endemic to them. And I kind of take that as a compliment, because we were going obviously to trying to reach beyond any specific religion into more just the experience of what it is to live. A lot of folks have claimed it's pretty Buddhist, but
I mean, we spoke with in development. We spoke with so many people, and I think the takeaway is how similar the belief systems are, and also most of the discrepancies are in the afterlife, and so we were very intentional to not go there. So Joe's heading that way, but then not many people have discrepancies about the great before. So that's why we really spent our time in that world.
I think a lot of religions, I mean, obviously, if you tell them, hey, everybody's the same, people get pissed off at you because they do have very different ideas. But yes. I think what they're after is a sense of understanding of what is it? Life seems overwhelming at times. What is it that how am I supposed to live? What's important? What are the important things? And that same reason why we, setting the film entirely in the great before, as soon as we talked about kind of why live and what's the purpose, you got to go to Earth. And I think similarly, a lot of the religions end up being about not what am I preparing for in the future, but what am I doing right now? How is this affecting my life and other people? So it was a cool research trip.
Well, speaking of research trips, here's a question. The look and feel of your New York sequences are just remarkable. We talked a little bit about how you use that autumn light and, through the autumn trees and whatnot. What research did you do for those sequences? Was there an extended field trip for the animators?
We did go to New York. We were really lucky because we what did we do? We did a ton of jazz clubs, and then we did a lot of walking around Queens. Kemp grew up in Brooklyn, which he'll say is the best borough, but all of our consultants that were, working musicians in New York, they all, for some reason, lived in Queens. I think mostly just it's more affordable. And so we picked the neighborhood there, just did a lot of research in those neighborhoods, went to a school, and met with Dr. Peter Archer, who is the middle school jazz band teacher, just incredible people. And I really think it's people that make up New York City. I mean, yes, we got the details of the gum. Our production designer was obsessed with taking pictures of gum on the sidewalk, and we wanted the buildings and the trees and all that. But really, it's if you look at the people, we spend a lot of time making sure there's a lot of diversity.
We also looked at a lot of films set in New York, especially from the 70s. You have Annie Hall and 3 Days of the Condor and stuff, films that were, I don't remember the name of the film stock, but had anamorphic lenses. So we tried to capture and replicate a lot of that, because I think it is unconsciously what a lot of us think of when you think of New York, Plus, it contrasted nicely with what was going on in the great before.
So here's a question. Given that there aren't really child characters in the movie, was it a concern at any point on how to make the movie's mature themes palatable and relatable to kids?
I thought about that at the beginning, and where I was putting all my chips was on the other souls, the unborn souls, because I knew they'd be fun and goofy and cute. But that was when the whole movie was set there. So then, as the movie evolved and their part got smaller, I became more kind of nervous. I don't know, Dana, did you worry about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's always in the back of I have 2 younger children. We've all had children. One thing we did on Inside Out that proved to be really helpful, so we did the same thing on Soul, is we had the entire crew bring in their own kids, and we did a kid screening. So I think we had 150 kids come in one day, and aging from 2 to 20. And it's really helpful because it's usually the parents that say their kids aren't following or don't get it. And then you will literally have the kid be like, no, and then explain to you what's happening. So it's pretty incredible. The same thing happened at our audience preview. The kid, parent would be like, I think that this film's too mature. And the kid would, their kid would be like,
so another question, what has been the most difficult lesson you have had to learn to be authentic in your personal and professional storytelling life? I'll just an easy one for you.
Yeah. Well, one thing I know, I was thinking about this over the weekend when I was first directing. I was the first director at Pixar other than John, and John Lasseter was just at this, the studio set he was such a collaborative guy, so energetic, had a lot of funny stories, and he's sort of a larger than life kind of guy. And as I struggled, a lot of times people would kind of pull me aside and say, what John would do in this situation is blah, blah. And I kind of tried to mimic him for a while, and I realized that is a disaster, right? I think just like in storytelling, when someone tells you, I have a note and I think this character's hair should be blue or whatever it is, I think what's often helpful is to unpack that and go, well, why? What is it the root of, we call it the spirit of the note? Like, what is it? Why are they suggesting this? It's fixing this concrete problem. And I think directing and style kind of comes to that too. Like, what is it that works? It's not the surface level stuff. It's the underlying elements of what it is they're doing. And you really have to kind of think a little deeper about when you work with someone that's really successful, what is it that they're doing? Because a lot of times you can get caught up in the style of which they do it. But if you are able to think more deeply about the idea that, in this case, John was very giving in dailies. A lot of times dailies it's the director speaks and everybody else shuts up, but he would solicit ideas from everybody. And that collaboration became a huge part of the way I work. And I think kind of coming from that. So I guess the short answer is you got to be authentic to who you are. You can't pretend to be somebody else. You got to figure out how you're going to put this across, and only you are going to be able to do that in that specific way.
Dana, anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I wish I had an hour to think about it. But just like, I don't know. I think I started at Pixar when I was really young, and I think I never wanted to speak up and say the hard thing. So for, I think, the first 10 years of my career, I probably was like hiding. And then I realized I'd often have something I'd want to say, but I wouldn't say it and someone else would say it. And then, so I just started to finally trust myself and say the thing that maybe no one wanted to hear, but needed to hear. And I think just trusting your voice. And, I don't know if that's making much sense, but
you were also great.
Yeah.
Dana was great at not saying it to promote herself, but for the film. Like, you can really tell when someone is out to protect the work as opposed to like trumpet themselves. And I think in all you spoke up about, it was always in defense of that. Dana was one of the great champions to make sure we had gender balance in the film, which is often a real blind spot. It's not like we intend to make all the movies about males, but it seems to happen. So we really needed pushing in that direction. Even the culture trust, as we were mentioning, having this amazing set of voices helping us make the film more accurate also came with a lot of extra, like, you just needed the time to digest all that. And often I would be pushing back going, I just need to tell the story first. And Dana was right about like, no, this is an important aspect of this story. So I guess my point was that you were a great champion of the film.
Well, thanks, Pete.
So here's the question. It was very impressive how accurate the music was in terms of where the hands go and how the notes are being played, similar to the guitar playing in Coco. How did you animate that so accurately?
Well, we set up like
cameras.
40. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I think we probably like horrified all the musicians we had because there was just cameras everywhere. But we really the animators just wanted to capture all those little details. And then the tool I believe that we use is MIDI. Is that right, Pete? It's called MIDI. And it's just a tool that like basically is capturing as John's on the piano, because I believe Coco used it for the guitar. It's capturing the notes that he's actually playing because he's moving so fast, so that they could look at that information, because they really wanted it to be accurate in the animation as well.
Yeah, the animators, I guess the keyboard would light up the notes that he was playing on that frame, and so they could
interesting
finger to it.
Now, obviously, you designed this movie to come out theatrically, and because of COVID, you had to pivot and release it on the Disney Plus streaming platform. Do you? I mean, I think we're all looking forward to getting back into movie theaters, but I am curious. Do you feel like um, this period is going to change the animation genre, or change how you're going to make films moving forward?
Well, I'm not convinced that once COVID lifts, people won't just rush back to theaters. I do think there are considerations that you make for the kind of film. So, in making film for on IMAX for a while, I was like, I can't just convert this and throw it up on a giant screen. I need to cut differently. I need to think differently about the shots. And similarly, there are things that you do for a small screen that probably wouldn't work on a regular cinema screen. So I don't know. I guess I'm saying I don't think in the near future, until we're really told by the audience and circumstances that, theaters are dying or dead, and now we're doing everything for streaming. I think we're going to continue to look at filmmaking and a communal experience of watching a movie together in the dark. I think that's what we're all here for.
I miss it.
I think we all do. I think,
Yeah.
for most of us, it's been almost a year since we've had the opportunity to be in a movie theater. And I think we all want to get back as soon as possible. Okay. The very last question. Who came up with a joke about the New York Knicks losing again?
That's Will Kemp. Yeah, he said that he needed a way to explain why he was tortured his entire life as a Knicks fan. So it's a great explanation.
Fantastic. Well, I think that's a great one to go out on. So, Pete, Docter, Dana Murray, thank you so much. First of all, for making such an incredible, extraordinary film, and for taking the time today to talk to us about it. It's been a pleasure to be in conversation with you.
That was fun. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, appreciate it.
And thank you to all of our friends at Film Society of Lincoln Center, the New York Film Festival, and the Artists Academy for giving us this platform to talk about the art and craft of film and to spend some time focusing on soul. I guess we're signing off now. This is Glenn Kaiser from the Dolby Institute. Thanks for joining us all. Once again, I want to thank our friends at Film at Lincoln Center, the New York Film Festival Artists Academy, Pete Docter, and Dana Murray for joining us today. If you'd like to check out Soul, you can find a link in our show notes. If you enjoyed this series, please continue leaving us a rating or a review on iTunes or on the Apple or Google Podcast apps. It really helps raise awareness for the series and helps us continue to grow. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to our new dedicated podcast feed, which you can find via the link in our show notes or wherever you get your podcasts by searching for Dolby. You won't want to miss our next episode. On Monday, March 15th, the Academy Award nominations will be coming out, and that's going to kick off our 2021 Oscar coverage. It promises to be a really interesting year for the Oscars. There's a whole slew of rule changes, including in the sound categories, and we're anticipating some changes in the broadcast because of COVID. So get your Oscar ballots ready. We will be cutting through the confusion and giving you the inside scoop on some of the trickiest categories to predict so you can win your annual office pool or your home Oscars pool. Until then, thanks again for joining us. This has been the Sound and Image Lab, the Dolby Institute podcast, and it's brought to you by the Dolby Institute. I'm your host, Glenn Kaiser. The producer and editor of the show is Michael Coleman. The executive producers are Amanda Schneider and Jack Ferry. Copywriting by Fayette Fox. Our production support is by Taylor Hines. And our Dolby Institute intern is Tristan Enriquez. Thank you for listening.